a 29-year-old woman. I run a small bookkeeping business in a quiet town about 3 hours from where I grew up. I live alone in a rented townhouse with a tiny garden, a coffee machine I love too much, and zero ties to anyone I share blood with by choice. The night the call came, I was in my kitchen reheating leftovers. My phone lit up with Harris' name, my older brother. I hadn't heard from him in over a year. Not a birthday, not a text, not even a hope you're well. Nothing. I let it ring the first time it rang again. Then a third time I picked up. He didn't say hello, no warm-up, just Dad had a stroke. He's in the hospital. You need to come. I didn't answer. I just hung up and stood there staring at the microwave clock until the numbers blurred. Let me back up. I moved out at 19. No dorm, no college fund, no parental support. I worked 2 part-time jobs and took community classes at night. I built everything on my own. Rent, bills, groceries, all of it. When I finally started my own bookkeeping business at 24, no one in my family even knew or asked. Harris is 4 years older, married, 3 kids, a mortgage he can't afford, and somehow still the golden boy. He never left town. He and my parents talk daily. They babysit for him, loan him money, host every birthday, and once even paid off his car insurance after an accident. Then there's Molly, my younger cousin. Her parents split when she was a kid, and somehow she became their bonus daughter. She had a bedroom at their place and a seat at every holiday dinner. They called her their girl in front of me more times than I can count. Meanwhile, I was introduced at weddings or cookouts as our daughter who moved away, always with a tone like I'd abandoned them. When I visited on my own dime, always uninvited, I was met with lukewarm hugs and casual jabs. I remember asking my mom once why she didn't tell me about a big family reunion they held. She blinked and said, "We assumed you'd be too busy." My father didn't speak much, not to me anyway. He missed my high school graduation soon, didn't call when I got promoted. When I sent him a picture of my first office, he replied, "Must be nice." That was it. Still, I kept trying, for years. I called every other week, sent Christmas cards. I drove in for birthdays when I could. But I was always the extra, the outsider. Eventually, I stopped calling. No fight, no drama, just silence. That was over a year before Harris called. After I hung up that night, I didn't cry. I didn't text anyone. I just stood there, letting the microwave beep in the background. I thought about that phrase, "You need to come." Where was that urgency when I was barely getting by at 20, eating ramen and skipping heat to pay rent? Where was that "we all need you" energy when I was sick with the flu and had to take an Uber to the ER because I didn't have family nearby? They never needed me until it was convenience, until I had something they wanted. I didn't go to the hospital. I didn't even ask which one. I turned my phone on silent, watched a movie, and went to bed early the next morning. I made coffee, fed the neighbor's cat. I was pet sitting and went to work. That was the moment everything shifted. Not because I stopped caring, but because I finally accepted the truth. They had already let go of me years ago, quietly, subtly, with every missed invitation and backhanded comment. So I decided I was going to stop reaching, stop apologizing for not being the version of a daughter they wanted. If they thought I was selfish before, they were about to see what selfish actually looked like. Because I wasn't going to be the one who showed up this time. I wasn't going to clean up a mess I didn't make. I wasn't going to sacrifice my peace for people who only remembered me when they were drowning. I didn't tell anyone about the call. Not Liv, not my landlord, not my friend who usually gets the tea first. I kept it to myself, let it simmer. And while they scrambled to figure out hospital forms and insurance claims, while they sat in waiting rooms refreshing their phones, I went about my life. I ordered Thai food, I got a new client referral. I started researching a weekend getaway just for me. I didn't block them, I didn't announce anything. I just chose myself for once and refused to feel guilty for it. They'd called me selfish for years. They'd whispered it at family dinners, rolled their eyes when I missed gatherings, and told each other stories about how I'd changed. So I figured, fine. Let them finally be right. The next morning, my phone started buzzing before sunrise. Missed calls, texts, even voice notes from numbers I didn't recognize at first. Relatives I hadn't heard from in years were suddenly flooding me with messages. Most started the same way. "He's your father." Then came the guilt. "Don't let the past get in the way. Family pulls together when it counts. You'll regret it if you don't come." I read a few. Then I swiped them, showered, got dressed, and headed to my office. I had 2 client meetings and a tax prep session scheduled that day. I kept every one of them. During lunch, I checked my voicemail. Harris had called again. His voice sounded stiff and clipped. "You're the only one who doesn't have a family to take care of. You have time." I stared at the wall for a while after that one. Then I typed out a message and sent it back to him. "You're right, I do have time, but I choose how I use it." That was the spark. 10 minutes later, the old family group chat, which had been dead since someone's baby shower 3 years ago, lit up like a bonfire. My messages started pouring in. Harris again. Molly, a couple of aunts, even one of my mom's church friends. You don't mean that. You're being cruel. He might not make it through the week. This is your chance to make it right. I muted the thread. Later that night, I scrolled through Molly's private family group post that someone forwarded to me. She'd posted 3 photos from the hospital. Dad in a wheelchair, an IV drip in the background, a cup of juice in his lap. Harris was standing beside him holding a newspaper. Molly was smiling next to the bed like it was a baby shower. Her caption read, "We're all here for you, Uncle. You're not alone. I wasn't even told which hospital he was in. Not one person gave me an address, a floor, or a contact number. They just assumed I'd show up, like a dog hearing the dinner bell." Liv, my closest friend, came by that evening with soup and groceries. She offered to drive me if I changed my mind. I told her I wasn't going. Not now. The next morning, I booked a 2-night stay at a spa an hour away. I drove out Friday after work with my phone on silent. The room had a view of pine trees and a rainfall shower. I got a facial, a massage, and ordered room service. I didn't tell a soul where I went. By Sunday night, I was back in my own bed. Rested, unbothered. Monday morning, I checked my inbox. 3 new voicemails from Harris, 1 from my mother. A dozen angry texts from Molly. A screenshot of a message from someone claiming my absence had embarrassed the family. When hospital staff asked about next of kin and I wasn't listed or present, I responded only once. I texted Harris, "You all made your choice a long time ago. Now I'm making mine." He replied 20 minutes later, "You'll regret this when he's gone." I didn't answer. I made dinner. Something simple. Roasted chicken, rice, steamed broccoli. I watched an old crime documentary I'd seen before and folded my laundry. Then I turned off my phone, set my alarm, and went to sleep early. I slept harder than I had in months. No guilt, no second guessing. That week, the calls slowed down. No one else messaged me directly, but Liv said she saw Molly post a passive-aggressive quote on her Instagram story. "You don't lose people. They choose to walk away." I didn't reply. I didn't even open the app. On Wednesday, a former neighbor from my hometown texted me a photo of a hospital bulletin board. It was a volunteer schedule. Molly and Harris' names were both listed under visitation support. My name wasn't anywhere on it. They were making it look like a family was rallying. They wanted the story to be about how everyone came together. Everyone except me. By Friday, I was back to my normal. I wrapped up 3 client files, signed on a new business, and picked up my dry cleaning. I walked past a florist on the way home. I paused, looked at the arrangement in the window, yellow tulips, and kept walking. I had no intention of going to the hospital. Not until I had a reason. Not just because they called. They'd spent years building a family without me. Now they could manage it without me too. By the end of that week, the messages had mostly stopped. No more guilt texts, no more passive-aggressive quotes. Silence. Then I got coffee with an old college friend who still lived in my hometown. She mentioned offhand like it was nothing, that my dad had been moved to long-term care. The hospital apparently released him 3 days earlier. No one told me. Not Harris, not my mother, not even Molly, who couldn't stop posting filtered hospital photos. A week earlier, I went home and searched every care facility in the county until I found a recent check-in notice for a patient under my dad's name. The facility was small, just 20 rooms. I checked their website. Outdated. The reviews were worse. Most mentioned overworked staff, missed medication doses, long call bell waits, and basic neglect. One even mentioned a patient falling during a transfer. I called the main desk the next morning, just asked if they needed any documents from family. The woman on the phone paused before saying, "Everything's being handled by immediate family." I didn't argue. I thanked her and hung up. Then I opened a new browser tab and searched again. This time I looked up Harris' work number. I called using a burner VoIP number and altered my voice slightly enough to sound like a receptionist. I told him I was confirming insurance details on behalf of his father's provider. He didn't hesitate. Name Dobb, Insurance ID Policy Group. He rattled it all off like it was nothing. I hung up and used that info to call the insurance company myself. The representative pulled up the file and explained that my father did qualify for extended care at a better-rated FAC, but the family opted for basic coverage to avoid additional copays. I confirmed a few more details before ending the call. They'd chosen the cheapest option and locked him into a subpar place, then turned around and called me heartless. I didn't scream. I didn't text anyone. I opened my file drawer and pulled out the contact card of a lawyer friend from a networking group. Within 2 days, she'd emailed me a scanned copy of the old family will. My name was listed clearly. Executor of estate medical proxy, if required. Power of attorney pending incapacity. Signed 6 years ago. No one had updated it since. The following Friday, I drove to the care facility just after lunch. I didn't announce myself. I walked up to the front desk, gave my name, and asked to speak with the administrator. The administrator was polite but confused at first. The care facility was tucked behind a shuttered gas station and a dry cleaners with a missing sign, the kind of place you'd miss unless you were looking for it. And even then, you'd question if you were in the right place. I parked across the street, sat in my car for a few minutes with the engine off, and just watched. The building looked old, but not crumbling. A squat one-story with beige siding and a sagging awning that flapped in the wind like it had given up a long time ago. The entrance had a wheelchair ramp that creaked under the weight of the one person I saw leaving, an elderly woman being pushed by a nurse who looked barely older than a teenager, her hair in a messy bun, her scrubs wrinkled like she'd slept in them. I waited until they disappeared down the sidewalk before I got out. My hands didn't shake, which surprised me. I thought they would. I walked in like I belonged there, gave my name, and asked to speak with the administrator. She was polite, maybe late 40s, a little tired around the eyes, but practiced in the way people who deal with families too often have to be. She pulled up a record and confirmed I was listed on the legal documents, though she seemed surprised no one had informed me about anything. I asked to see my father's room. She hesitated, then gave in. The hallway smelled faintly of bleach and something sweet, artificial, like someone had tried too hard to mask the inevitable. His room was at the end of the corridor, next to a broken vending machine and across from a supply closet. The door was cracked open. I paused for half a breath before pushing it gently. The room was small, 2 beds, though the one by the window was empty, fluorescent lighting overhead casting everything in a flat, yellowish tone. He was asleep or unconscious. It was hard to tell. His face was thinner than I remembered, cheeks sunken, jaw more pronounced. He looked older than he should have. A plastic water cup sat untouched on the tray beside him. His fingers twitched once like he was dreaming. I didn't move closer. I just stood in the doorway and watched, not feeling much of anything. A nurse walked by, then backtracked. "You his daughter?" she asked. I nodded slowly. She didn't smile. "He has good days and bad. Sometimes he talks, sometimes he just stares at the wall. Keeps asking for someone named Claire." I blinked. That was my middle name. Only he ever used it. I asked if anyone had called me. She shrugged. "We're told to go through the family rep. Your brother." "Of course." I thanked her, turned, and walked back out. In the hallway, I pulled out my phone and stared at it. I didn't text Harris. I didn't call anyone. Instead, I walked back to the front desk, asked to speak with the billing department, and requested copies of all recent decisions. It took a while, but eventually someone brought me a folder. I stepped outside and read through it on a bench near the parking lot. The paperwork confirmed what the insurance rep had said. Harris had opted for the cheapest care option, despite eligibility for something significantly better. No consultation, no discussion, no acknowledgement of my authority. My name was buried deep in the old documents, but no one had updated anything. They just assumed that I wouldn't care, that I was too far gone, that they could do what they wanted. I drove home in silence, windows down even though the air was cold. I needed the sting. I needed to remember why I wasn't crying. I spent that night reading over the will again, cross-checking the legal designations. The next morning, I emailed a lawyer I knew from a Women in Business seminar. By evening, she confirmed everything. I had full rights to make decisions on behalf of my father if he was deemed incapacitated, and based on his medical chart, he was. Harris had been acting without legal authority, possibly fraudulently. My lawyer drafted a notice of activation for my POA and sent it to the facility. By Monday, I had access to every file, every form, every medical decision. I didn't call Harris. I didn't warn him. Instead, I requested a review of care and began the process of transferring my father to a private facility 3 towns over with clean audits and a staff-to-patient ratio that didn't scream neglect. When the care facility administrator called to confirm the transfer paperwork, I gave my official consent. That afternoon, Harris called me twice. I let it ring. On the 3rd try, I picked up. His voice was sharp, clipped with panic masked as anger. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I answered calmly. "Fulfilling my legal role, something you should have consulted me about." He laughed, bitter, short. "You think this makes you look good? You didn't even show up when he was in the hospital." I smiled, though he couldn't see it. Neither did he. For most of my life. There was silence on the other end. Then a muttered curse, and he hung up. Molly texted later that night, "You're really doing this? This is low, even for you." I didn't respond. I forwarded her number to spam and blocked it. I signed the final approval form that night. The transfer was scheduled for Friday. On Thursday, a nurse from the new facility called to walk me through their onboarding process. She sounded warm, attentive. Said they'd already ordered his preferred snacks based on notes from his previous files. Things Harris never bothered to mention. Friday afternoon, I received a call confirming he'd arrived. The nurse said he was confused but stable. That evening, Harris called again. This time, I answered. He didn't yell. He didn't ask. He just said, "You think you're the only one who cared about him?" I replied, "No, I just think I'm the only one who cared enough to do it right." And then, just like that, I hung up and turned my phone off for the weekend. I poured a glass of wine, made pasta, and ate by the window while the sun slipped behind the hills. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated, but I did feel steady. And for once, that was enough. The following week settled into a strange kind of quiet, the kind that felt less like peace and more like the moment between a lightning flash and the rumble of thunder. I kept checking my email, half expecting legal threats or dramatic family appeals. But all that came were the usual client receipts and an e-invite to a local entrepreneur breakfast I didn't plan to attend. My father had been at the new facility for 5 days before I worked up the nerve to visit. This place was different from the last. Clean hallways, soft lighting, staff who smiled without being forced. I didn't go in with flowers or a dramatic entrance. I just showed up and asked for his room. The nurse at the desk remembered me by name. "He's been doing better," she said, like she knew I needed to hear that. When I walked in, he was awake, seated by the window in a robe that fit, a book open on his lap, though I could tell he wasn't reading. His eyes flicked toward me, narrowed, and for a long time, neither of us said anything. "Claire," he said finally, not quite a question, not quite a statement. I nodded once. "It's me." He looked smaller than I remembered, and more human. We didn't talk about the stroke. We didn't talk about the years between. He asked if I still lived in that city outside the city, and I said yes. He asked if I was married, and I said no. He nodded at both like he was mentally placing facts on a shelf. "Harris says you hate us now," he said after a while. I didn't answer right away. I walked to the chair across from him, sat down, folded my hands. "I don't hate you. I just stopped hoping you'd be someone else." His lips pressed into a line, but he didn't argue. "You always made it hard," he said quietly. "Always wanted to be right." I laughed at that. Not loud or cruel, just soft, surprised. "No, I just wanted to be seen." He didn't respond. I think for a moment, he understood. I didn't stay long that day. I told the nurse he liked his tea with honey, that he hated hospital socks, and that if he started staring out the window for too long, it meant his blood sugar was dropping. She wrote it all down. I left the facility with a strange ache behind my ribs. Not guilt exactly, but something adjacent. Back home, there was a letter waiting in my mailbox. Not an email, not a text. A real letter, folded in thirds in a cheap envelope. It was from Molly. Inside was a single sheet of paper with her neat cursive across it. "He's dying, you know. Maybe not today or tomorrow, but soon. You might have your legal rights, but that doesn't mean you're right. You hurt people. You burned bridges. Just remember that." I stared at the words for a long time. Then I folded the letter back up and slid it into the recycling bin. I didn't need Molly's guilt packaged in stationery. That weekend, I called the facility to ask about his blood work. The nurse gave me the update and mentioned he'd started asking to see the accountant again. He didn't call me his daughter. That landed sharper than I expected. Still, I visited every few days, just long enough to check in, not long enough to reopen wounds. He never apologized. I never demanded it. But one day, as I helped him unwrap a granola bar, he said, "I remember your first ledger, that notebook with the cats on it." I blinked. "You kept receipts in it. For candy you sold at school." I almost didn't know how to answer. "Yeah, you said it was a waste of time." He looked down at the wrapper. I was wrong. Just that. No tears, no movie moment. But it settled into something real between us. Meanwhile, the rest of the family stayed silent. I didn't hear from Harris again. Not after the transfer, not after the letter. I didn't seek him out. Instead, I focused on what I could control. My clients, my mornings, my sleep schedule. I even started running again, just a few miles at first. Every step helped clear something out of my chest. My lawyer finalized an updated medical directive with the new facility. I kept every paper, every file, every log in a binder labeled Dad Care. A few weeks later, the facility called to tell me he'd fallen. Not badly, no break, but enough to need monitoring. When I showed up, he was in bed, irritated. "Too many rules here," he grumbled. "They make me feel like I'm already dead." I sat beside him and said nothing. After a while, he looked at me. "You still don't forgive me, do you?" I met his eyes. "I'm not here to punish you. But you're not here to love me either," he said. "Maybe not," I answered. "But I'm here." That seemed to land. He nodded, just once. In the hallway, I overheard two nurses whispering. One said, "She's the one who took over after the sun messed everything up." The other replied, "Good. Someone needed to." I didn't react, but something in me relaxed. I hadn't come to save him. I hadn't come to play the hero. But I had come, on my terms. And somehow, that was enough for now. The summer crept in slowly, unnoticed at first until one morning I woke to the light cutting across my bedroom in that specific way it only does in June, sharp and golden and slightly invasive. At the care facility, they'd moved Dad to a room closer to the nurse station. Just in case, they said. And I didn't ask what in case meant because I already knew. His voice had changed, softer, less gravel in it, as if the fight that used to live behind every word had packed up and moved out. He didn't argue with the staff anymore. He let people help him with things he used to insist on doing himself, and that small surrender, that quiet acceptance, unnerved me more than any anger ever had. I kept visiting. 3 times a week at first, then more when they hinted he was having episodes at night, moments where he seemed to forget where he was or who had just been there. The first time he called me by my mother's name, I didn't correct him. I just nodded and changed the subject. I didn't feel like a daughter, not really, but I also didn't feel like a stranger anymore. Somewhere in that gray space between those identities, I found enough footing to keep showing up. Meanwhile, the rest of the family remained ghosts. Harris hadn't called in weeks. Molly had gone back to her passive-aggressive Instagram posts and curated family updates, none of which mentioned me or the transfer, or the fact that I now had control of Dad's care. I received one voicemail from my mother, short and clipped. "I hope you're happy." I didn't reply. At night, after my visits, I started writing things down. Not for anyone else, not to publish, just to make sense of it all. Little notes like, "He asked about my coffee shop again. I don't own one." Or, "He said the cat came back. We never had a cat." The mind is strange when it starts to unravel. It pulls old threads and weaves them into new shapes. One day, while changing the batteries on his remote, I found a folded piece of paper tucked under the tray on his nightstand. My name was written in block letters. Inside, a barely legible note. "You turned out fine. Better than fine." No signature. Just those 6 words. I kept it in my wallet, unsure if he remembered writing it. Maybe it had taken him days. Maybe he thought he'd already given it to me. But it felt like a crack in the wall between us, just wide enough to breathe through. Then came the insurance review. The facility called to say that some forms hadn't been updated, and they needed Harris's input. His name still lingered on one of the outdated documents. I sighed, thanked them, and said I'd handle it. I called Harris directly that night, the first time I'd dialed his number since the stroke. He picked up on the second ring. "Didn't think I'd hear from you," he said. "No hello." "It's about Dad," I said. "They need you to sign off on removing your name from the old care documents. I'm the listed proxy now." Silence. Then, "You always get what you want, don't you?" I bit back the instinct to snap. "What I want is for him to be taken care of properly. You made your choice. I made mine." He laughed, bitter and low. "Yeah, well, good luck with it. I'm not signing anything." "Then I'll go to court," I said. "You'll lose." Another pause, longer this time. "You think you're better than us?" he finally said. "No," I answered. I just stopped pretending I wasn't. I hung up before he could respond. The next week, I filed a request through my lawyer to formally remove Harris from the documentation. It wasn't contested. He didn't even show up. I found out later from a mutual acquaintance that he and Molly had quietly accepted the new arrangement and were telling people they'd stepped back to let me do what I needed to. Cowards, both of them, more concerned with appearances than actual care. But I didn't have time to dwell on that. Dad's condition had started to decline again. Less appetite, more confusion. He called me by my mother's name again. This time I said, "She's not here, it's Claire." He blinked at me, confused, then nodded like he was trying to fold the truth into whatever story his brain had built. "You stayed," he whispered one night, his hand twitching in mine. "Even after..." He trailed off. "Yes," I said. "I stayed." A week later, the nurse called at 3:14 a.m. His breathing was shallow. They'd moved him to a private room. "We don't know how long," she said gently, "but if you want to come, now's the time." I sat on the edge of my bed for a full 5 minutes. Not because I didn't know what to do, but because I already knew exactly what this moment would be. I got dressed, drove in silence, and arrived just after 4 a.m. The room smelled like lavender and antiseptic. He was asleep, or something close to it. I sat down beside him, same chair as always. I didn't cry, I didn't speak. I just held his hand and listened to the rhythm of his breath. Slow, uneven, fading. I thought about the years I spent waiting for this man to become someone he wasn't. About all the moments I gave him pieces of me he didn't know what to do with. And then I thought about now, how, despite it all, I had made the decision to be here, not out of duty, not from pressure, but because I had chosen to. That mattered. More than anything else, that mattered. Somewhere between those last hours and the morning sun cutting through the blinds, I understood something I hadn't before. Closure isn't always a door slammed shut. Sometimes it's just sitting in the same room with your history and realizing it can't hurt you anymore. The morning after my father passed, the facility administrator offered to call the rest of the family for me, but I declined. "They'll find out eventually," I said, and she gave me a look that hovered between sympathy and something colder, maybe judgment or disbelief. But she didn't press. I walked out into the parking lot, the sun just rising, the sky smudged with soft oranges and quiet blues, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel rushed. I sat in my car for almost 20 minutes, staring at the empty passenger seat. The air smelled like grass and pavement and whatever hospital-grade cleaning agent had soaked into my clothes. I didn't cry, not then. I just drove home, took a long shower, and started making a list. Not of funeral arrangements or calls to make, that would come later, but a list of everything I had already done. I needed proof. Proof that I had stayed. Proof that I had made the hard choices. Proof that I had held his hand at the end when no one else did. The death certificate came 2 days later, delivered by a courier who looked at me like I was too young to be signing off on something so final. "Are you his daughter?" he asked, handing me the envelope. "Yes," I said without hesitation. The funeral home called shortly after. Harris had apparently contacted them already, trying to coordinate something. I told them I was the executor, and they were not to proceed without my written approval. That night, Harris finally called. "So it's done," he said. No emotion, no preamble. "Yes," I replied. "You don't have to pretend like you care now." "This isn't about pretending," I said calmly. "It's about facts. And the fact is, you didn't show up." He laughed, low and bitter. "You think this makes you the better person?" "No," I said. "It just makes me the one who stayed." There was a pause, and then he muttered something under his breath before hanging up. The funeral was small. I didn't invite anyone. The facility staff offered to send a few nurses who had cared for him. I accepted. I didn't tell Harris the time or location. I didn't tell Molly either. I chose a quiet cemetery on the edge of town, nothing flashy, just a modest grave next to a row of unremarkable stones, a simple plaque, his name, dates, nothing more, no scripture, no eulogy, just a body returned to the ground. I didn't cry during the burial either. I watched the dirt fall, slow and steady, until the coffin was gone. Afterward, I went home, made coffee, and sat in the tiny garden behind my townhouse. The jasmine was blooming. The cat I sometimes watched for my neighbor hopped the fence and curled up beside me. I exhaled like I'd been holding my breath for years. The silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It didn't feel like abandonment or punishment. It felt earned. I didn't check social media that week. Liv texted to say Molly had posted a filtered photo of her and Harris at a candlelight vigil they apparently threw in Dad's honor, complete with a quote about legacy and forgiveness. "You okay?" Liv asked. I replied, "I'm good. Better than good." And it was true. For the first time, I was living outside their narrative. They could spin whatever version they wanted to the world, but I had lived the truth, held it in my hands, sat with it until it no longer burned. I started cleaning out the storage unit the next weekend. It had been in Dad's name, and with the power of attorney I now held, I had access. I expected junk, old tools, musty furniture, maybe some boxes of paperwork, but what I found instead stopped me cold. 3 boxes marked simply, Claire. Inside, every card I'd ever sent him, photos I'd mailed over the years, a printed version of the newsletter I'd once created for my business, my high school graduation program with my name circled. I sat on the concrete floor and read through each piece like they were relics from a forgotten life. He hadn't responded, hadn't called, hadn't said a word, but he'd kept them, all of them, tucked away like a secret only he was allowed to have. I didn't know if that made it better or worse. Maybe he hadn't known how to be a father to me. Maybe pride or guilt or sheer habit got in the way. But something in him still saw me, enough to save pieces of me, even if he couldn't say my name when it mattered. I didn't cry, not until I found a letter, undated, unsent, written in shaky block letters. "Claire, I don't know how to talk to you anymore. I think I was too hard on you. Maybe I didn't know what to do with a daughter who didn't need me. But I was proud, always. I just didn't know how to say it." I sat there, holding that letter like it might dissolve if I blinked too hard. And then finally, I cried. Not for the man he was, but for the one he almost tried to be. I took only 1 box with me when I left. The rest I left for disposal. I didn't need more ghosts in my closet. At home, I tucked the letter into the same folder that held the power of attorney papers, the care facility bills, the funeral receipts. Paper proof of a story few would believe if I told them. By the time the estate paperwork was finalized, I had already decided what to do with whatever was left. Nothing would go to Harris or Molly. Not out of vengeance, but because they didn't need it. Not like I did. I donated most of it anonymously to the care home's patient support fund. The administrator called me in tears when she found out. I just told her, it's what he would have wanted, and hung up before I could doubt it. The day the check cleared, I poured myself a glass of wine, opened the windows wide, and let the summer air sweep through every room of my house. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting to be chosen. I already had been, by myself. A month after the estate closed, I got a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to it while I watered my garden. It was my mother. Her voice was thinner than I remembered. She said she'd heard about the funeral, about the estate, about what I'd done, and she didn't mean it like a thank you. You didn't even tell us, she said. You didn't give us a chance to be there. I deleted the message before it ended. There would be no more chances. Not for them, not for me. I had given every version of myself to that family over the years. The obedient daughter, the invisible guest, the desperate forgiver, and none of it had been enough. So now I was done. Completely. I changed my number the next day. I packed a bag and went on a trip. No itinerary, just a map with circles around small towns I'd always wanted to see. I didn't tell Liv until I was already on the road. You running away? She joked over voice memo. I smiled before answering. No, I'm finally going somewhere. I stayed in a quiet inn by the coast for 3 days, ate fresh bread with honey for breakfast, read books without checking my phone once, and watched the ocean move like it owed me nothing and gave everything. One night, wrapped in a thick sweater on the porch, I thought about legacy. Not the kind you leave behind in bank accounts or family photo albums, but the kind you build in silence, in survival, in choosing yourself again and again until the choice becomes instinct. I wasn't angry anymore. Not at them, not even at him. I was just done performing grief I didn't feel for people who never mourned losing me. When I returned home, I planted new herbs in the garden. Basil, thyme, a single sprig of lavender. I rearranged the furniture in my living room. I framed the letter my father wrote, the one I found in the storage unit, but instead of hanging it up, I put it in a drawer. A part of the story, not the whole story. Liv came over with wine a week later and asked if I felt lighter. I feel real, I said. Like the version of me they never saw finally gets to live. She nodded, didn't press, just toasted to that. There were no more texts from Molly, no cryptic Instagram stories, no sudden apologies or regrets. Just silence. The kind I used to dread but now craved like air. Sometimes, late at night, I'd sit in the stillness and think about all the versions of me I'd had to bury to get here. The girl who begged to be invited, the woman who kept showing up to locked doors, the daughter who held onto scraps and called them love. All gone now. In their place, a woman with her own keys, her own life, and no one left to answer to but herself. And that, finally, was enough.